no nai kalame kale huai e halele huano iana kanoi o kauno ia e anu ine heli anei ho io kahiki mai no oko ki puno me ke aloha Fragrant is the hala and the lehua. In this house of the lehua, for the mist. In this moment of mine, I cherish it so. For I am filled with an eagerness from the longing of your arrival. For now that you have come, you come with aloha. You come in love. Aloha. For the Hawaiian protocol is determined by 4 particulars. 1, do the right thing, in the right place, at the right time, and with the right people. And so we begin our gatherings and our sharings, our teachings, our learnings, and our exchanges with an oli. And that was Oli Aloha, a chant of love composed by our cultural ambassador, Mary Kapālama. So mahalo for allowing me to share with you and for celebrating together.
My body, an ocean of memory, never remembering where streams of limbs began and ended. Overflowing into an abyss of trenches. I carry fragmented pain, the vulnerability of repeatedly touching, isolating wounds that transform like water through movement. Like water transforms through movement, it also heals. It also heals. For years, my body has held trauma, like salt holds water, expanding, filling, swelling. Yet my body, queer like the ocean, remembers fluidity, remembers ancestral breath, remembers being held, cradled by consensual bodies of water, dancing to the constellations of resilient sea. There is power in vulnerability. There is power in vulnerability. There is power in vulnerability. My body, an ocean of memory. This is how my body returns to me.
philosophy questions a lifetime of formative Hawaii memories funneled to me through pop culture and visits to the islands as a tourist. Certainly this is part of a larger necessary story about the loneliness and challenge of self-defining that mixed-race people generally face in a racist yet monoracially aligned society. But this is also a story of how, in my personal search for rooted belonging in a multiracial body, I was misled by colonialist narratives my entire life to believe, as an Asian mixed girl and woman, that I could find that belonging in a settler myth about Hawaii. It is the story of how, in my intense desire to see others like me and belong somewhere, anywhere, I ultimately allowed myself to be misled, becoming an abettor to colonialism at the expense of Hawaii and her children, the Kanaka Maoli. And in the end, this is the story of how I have begun a new chapter, in which I challenge myself to keep searching for a transformative mixed-race identity that is not built upon the oppression of others. It must be acknowledged that in this storytelling I have advantages, being a light-skinned person of East Asian and white descent, a mixed woman who fits a dominant stereotype, born and raised entirely on the continent. I face fewer consequences for speaking and can speak, because colonizer and settler readers will feel more comfortable with me in this body I inhabit. Throughout this book, I endeavor always to be aware of my privilege where it exists and try not to write in ways that would harm Native Hawaiians. I am not, nor am I attempting to be an expert on Hawaii in any way. This text should not be an endpoint for anyone. I encourage you to explore the sources at the end of this book. All readers should seek out the words, and activism of Native Hawaiians who are doing truly brilliant things in the world. So, how did I write this book? I wrote this book not this last summer, but the summer before that, so almost exactly a year ago. I was visiting Hawaii with friends, as I mentioned in the notes, Oahu and Kauai. And I had been to Hawaii many times before, but this was the first time that I had gone with a political consciousness as a woke woman. And so I was wanting to do some really deep, creative, free writing around this mixed-race identity I have and where I fit in this social and political landscape. It seemed like a really good opportunity to do that because, as you probably all know, Hawaii has one of the largest Asian American and mixed-race populations in the entire United States. Number one. Number two, I have often been assigned Hawaii belonging, even though I'm not from Hawaii and I've never lived there. So there was a lot to unpack, and I wanted to step outside my box, my Seattle box, and really look at this stuff and dig really deep. And let me read to you again. I will say, this book then is a book about being mixed race and the liminality and loneliness that can come with that, but it's also a book about land, landlessness, and what it means to be home. The day is brighter and brighter. The orange light of the rising sun is cutting through the kitchen window, hitting the cabinets in geometry, lines, and angles, speckled by the shadows of tree leaves. In the last decennial census, and we're coming up on another one, by the way, 2020, and we're going to see a big explosion in this identification. So on the last census, 9 million people reported they were mixed race. Of those 9 million, 92% reported they were biracial, and 75.5% reported they were part white, like me. Of those 9 million, the largest overall number were in California, where I'm from, and the largest percentage of the state population were in Hawaii, where I'm about to go. Specifically, Honolulu was the place with the highest proportion of people reporting mixed white, mixed Asian, and mixed Hawaiian Pacific Islander identities. So you'll understand when I say that even though I'm not from the islands and have never lived there, who I am as an Asian mixed person has still always been filtered through the prism of Hawaii, because the place where there are the most people who look like me in a settler colony where so few look like me is Hawaii. Because others connect me to the islands whether I ask them to or not. Because there's a mirage, a story about people who look like me that comes from this place. Being mixed race in a highly racialized, fissured, and fractured society is often about searching for where we belong. But belonging within division is complicated and painful, and our desperate search for it easily goes astray. Too often, I see people who look like me cling to a complicit identity that is dead asleep, willfully blind, and hurtful to us as well as others. That complicit identity is modeled after a settler trope born in Hawaii, a model, multiracial narrative about mixed people that furthers the oppression of Native Hawaiian people there, and is increasingly used on the mainland to further the oppression of Black and brown people here. Okay. So, I'm in Hawaii, I'm doing this writing, and it's bringing up all kinds of feelings that kind of fall into two general categories, right? So on the one hand, I'm unpacking really personal experiences, and I know there's people in this room who already have the book and started reading it. Hands? Anybody? I did. And so people have been calling me and telling me about this, which, by the way, when you get the book, please, I want to know about your experience and the conversation you have with it and your thoughts and about your identity. So I'm there, I'm in Hawaii, I'm around more people that look like me than I'm ever around in Seattle. And all this stuff is coming up about these Hawaii memories that I've had throughout my life and my childhood that are pretty painful. I write about a lot of those stories in the book. And I'll read a couple of those memories to you now. One is from my husband's childhood, he's also an Asian mixed person, and one is from mine, to give you an example of what I mean. In 3rd grade, my Asian mixed husband was picked to sing Hawaiian war chant in a year-end program for parents at his mostly white elementary school. Every morning throughout the year, 3rd graders at his school would practice singing different songs, many of them from white musicals like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. White teachers would walk the room, lean down and listen, carefully assess, nodding their heads when children sang admirably. They pointedly asked my husband, 8-year-old Asian mixed boy, to audition for the war chant solo. He went out against a white boy, and in the final program sang to a primarily white audience, accompanied by a white hippie playing conga drums. He still knows the Hawaiian chorus, word for word, to this day, and I won't make you do it right now. But those original lyrics by Kanaka Maoli have nothing to do with war. They were actually Haole, which means white, appropriated from a Native Hawaiian love song written by Prince. The love song became the misleadingly named hit Hawaiian war chant in 1936 when Johnny Noble, a white band leader at the Moana Hotel in Waikiki Beach, decided to create a jazzed-up adaptation for entertainment. So you can see how, even though we're not in Hawaii, we're somehow connected to this story and what's happened in Hawaii, right? My husband and I, as adults, have laughed painfully about this story more than once. In hindsight, it does seem implausibly funny. Anyway, what else is there to do? It happened. Laugh or cry, I guess. When it comes to our son, who is at the moment also 8 years old, however, the laughing instantly disappears. Whoosh. Vacuum sealed, banished from our minds. The recollection doesn't even seem slightly funny anymore. Our faces settle sternly, seriously, ferociously when we imagine what we would do if our boy found himself in the same situation. We both agree there is no fucking way we would ever allow our son to be tokenized like that, ever. So that's what happened to my husband, and here's some of the things that were funneled to me. Does anyone know the movie South Pacific? Okay, maybe like just a few people. I feel like I'm aging. I'm like dating myself here. Maybe. Okay, I'll read this section that explains the movie a little bit too, so you know. It was a kind of a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical from like the golden era of movie musicals, white movie musicals. And I was raised on movie musicals. I have a white mother, and you know, it seemed innocent enough to her, so I just watched these and I loved them, I adored them, and had no analysis around them, right? When I was a child, I loved watching musicals. At the time I was writing this book, Moana had just come out. So I was talking about, oh, here's Moana, and my kid's really in love with this movie, and wow, I watched musicals too. But I watched the early ones, the genre makers, the classics, which had been a pop culture staple of my white grandparents' youth. In photos taken during their heyday, 1940s and 50s actresses like Shirley Jones and Debbie Reynolds remind me so much of my beloved Grammy. Cute and snazzy, dressed to the nines, hair coiffed in ever-perfect waves as middle-class white women were expected to appear in those times. I remember sitting at night on my grandparents' bed with my sister in our nightgowns, watching Grammy painstakingly roll and pin the curlers under her hair. Does anyone have a memory like that? She would sleep in them all night to produce faultless curls next morning. She wore curls to her very last day, even when she needed wigs because she got too sick. My slippery Asian mixed hair, on the other hand, never did hold curls very well. Except for that one time my mom had it permed like Annie into a giant pom-pom exploding with spirals when I was maybe 7 years old. And when I just got pictures of that from a family member the other day, so maybe I'll put it up on Instagram tomorrow. No shame. When I look back at pictures of that perm puffy and pillowing around my grinning little Asian mixed face, I am totally mystified. I have no idea what my mother was thinking. I looked so ridiculous and strange. Likely I don't need to tell you that movie musicals of the golden age were very, very white. As the mixed-race child of a white mother, I was preferred this stuff uncritically and internalized its white norming without question. It wasn't only until recently, as an almost middle-aged adult, that I finally recognized this white dominant messaging and began to unpack it. Can you imagine? Like decades of just thinking, oh, that's just how it is. And as I have done so, I'm also consciously recognizing for the first time that mixed people like me did appear in some of these white movies. Yul Brynner in The King and I, Nancy Kwan in Flower Drum Song, it's also mixed, and notably Franz Nguyen in South Pacific. They were there, they appeared, but only in troubled ways that I now see had inescapable implications for me, the mixed girl watching. I'll read you the little synopsis of South Pacific for those of you who are not sure what that movie is. Set in the South Pacific during World War II, the movie follows white characters as they discover and supposedly unpack their racism through interracial love against, ironically, the backdrop of U.S. imperialism. So, we saw those themes, right, in the art that we experienced earlier, the beautiful, glorious art that we experienced earlier, okay? This has been going on for a long time. White wave officer Nellie falls in love with wealthy French planter Emile, but is unsure if she can marry him because then she would have to stepmother his 2 mixed-race children by a deceased islander wife. And white Lieutenant Cable has a white girlfriend back home, but is riddled by guilt and doubt when he suddenly finds himself falling in love with Elliott, played by Franz Nguyen, the brown daughter of a local Tonkinese trader. Okay, this is what I watched when I was a kid. I always felt perplexed by South Pacific as a kid. It was supposed to be one of those first movies to talk about racism in honest, important ways. But as a mixed child, seeing people who looked like me act as mirrors for white people's revelations, I didn't find the film revelatory at all. I watched it and avoided it at the same time. I wanted to like it, but didn't really. I had no idea actress Franz Nguyen was a mixed woman with an Asian father and white mother like me, again, only until just recently. When I was a kid, because the movie wanted it this way, I saw Elliott as the familiar trope, a radiant foreign Asian lady who can't speak English and is therefore at the mercy of white men around her. The hard truth is, Franz Nguyen could not be allowed to play a mixed woman on screen. She needed to unquestionably appear the brown love interest of a confused white man, so the movie could congratulate itself for having white characters ask important questions about their racism. If Nguyen had played her real-life self, a Vietnamese French woman who would go on to earn a master's degree in clinical psychology, starting a second career as a counselor for abused women and children and women in prison, that would never have worked. For the movie's white gears to grind, Nguyen needed to sit silently in a tide pool, stunning and exotic, doing hula hands to the racist song Happy Talk, so Lieutenant Cable could navigate toward personal epiphany via enraptured love. Wait, there's more. That registers now. Sometimes I'm surprised that no one ever had a frank conversation with me about this movie. Sometimes I puzzle why my white mother would let me consume its racist, self-hating shit. But really, I also now know the painful answer to that question. That in her willfully ignorant parenting, my white mother showed me how she too was unconsciously harboring implicit bias like Nellie's, but perhaps against her own daughter, me. So those are the kinds of things I was unpacking in Hawaii. Not your typical corporate tourist tropical vacation. So on the one hand, I was unpacking a lot of that, and that was really powerful to be in this geography, that was helping me learn about those memories and unpack those things more carefully. But I was also having to reconcile my role as a tourist in Hawaii, right? Because I'm not from Hawaii and I'm not native Hawaiian. So I was having to acknowledge that, challenge my own stereotypes about Hawaii, and correct my miseducation. So there's actually quite a bit of research in this book. For people who are from Hawaii, it probably would not be anything new, but I really wanted to put that in here because there's so few of us on the mainland who actually know the true story of Hawaii and how it was overthrown and forcibly annexed into the United States. This history is just increasingly lost. So that's in here because I want to make sure that we know that. And I'll read to you another passage that kind of shows the way I was also grappling with being a visitor in Hawaii and my role in the corporate tourism and the militarism and colonialism that has really taken over there. And this I wrote when I first got there with my son. We're here. As my son and I disembark in Honolulu, the airplane's white captain standing by the cockpit meets our eyes jovially and says, "Welcome back." This happens to me all the time. An Asian woman greeting passengers as we step onto the jetway looks us over and says, "Welcome home." Hands clasped before her, a colorful lei adorning her neck, she smiles warmly. I can't stop giggling. Home. We grab our bags from luggage claim and head outside where we wait too long for the rental car shuttle. There's a big crowd. Everybody's waiting and impatient. It's cramped, hot, humid. After a very early and long flight, my son is hungry, tired, and increasingly cranky by the minute. I start snapping at him because I'm tired, hungry, and increasingly cranky too. Shuttle upon shuttle arrives, leaves. I crank my neck to see into the street looking for our ride. My body gets stiff and painful from standing in stress. After almost a half hour, the shuttle finally arrives. The driver is a large brown man in a terrible mood. He doesn't smile, doesn't make eye contact, slings luggage into the back, motions passengers to get in, irritated. Once inside the shuttle, I see he's so large and tall that he barely fits in the driver's seat. His head is crammed against the roof of the vehicle, and he has to stick one long leg out to the side to make room for the other leg to drive. He doesn't, or can't, clip on the seatbelt. Then, the driver glances in the rearview mirror and sees a surfboard leaning precariously against the luggage rack. It belongs to a slender, blue-eyed, blonde white man sitting in the far back with an arm around a brown woman, presumably his wife, and two mixed children at his side. The white man is tan and athletic, good-looking in a catalog kind of way. Likely, I imagine, he knows what he's doing with that surfboard. But still, I reflect, there's something about his cool surfer dad image in stylish, crisp swimwear that makes his brown mixed family look like trophy accessories. I feel uncomfortable. "I told you to move that board," the driver growls at the white man. But the white man won't accept being scolded like a child in front of everyone, and so meets the driver's gaze, pissed off. "I did." The driver rises from his seat, tall, looming, and turns around to face the white man, who looks almost petite by comparison. The two men's eyes lock, get smaller, flare. Masculinity is rising to a fever pitch in this already hot shuttle. "No," letters the driver, his voice tight. "You didn't." Chin raised, the driver looks down at this white man like he hates him, even though they clearly don't know each other at all. Slowly, stormily, the driver gives a final warning. "I told you to put it over there." But the white man's not giving in. He raises his chin too, defiant, and he raises his voice. "I don't know what you're talking about," the white man insults. "You're not making any sense." That's it. The driver's fury is unleashed. His face becomes mighty and ferocious. His brown body seems to grow even larger still, and I can feel every passenger in the shuttle quickly suck in and hold their breath. "I told you to move that board," bellows the driver powerfully. Not yelling exactly, but in a low, loud voice that feels like it's using all the last breathable air. "Move it now." The white man won't cower. You can see it in his face. He's not scared. But at the cooing, prompting, and caressing of his brown wife, he finally gives in and moves the board silently. She just wants it to stop. The white man purses his lips and settles back into his passenger seat, ticked off, while the driver, shaking his head vexed, pushes himself back into the driver's seat where there isn't enough room. The white man's brown wife half smiles, consoles her husband. Okay, everything's good. We're on vacation in Hawaii. Woohoo! She's not looking at anyone else, but she's speaking to the rest of us too. There's a bright flower tucked behind one of her ears, under her long hair. I'm pretty sure if these two men had been alone on a beach somewhere, they would have fought. But they're not. We're in a Honolulu airport shuttle, driven by the brown man, that's taking the white man and his mixed family, and me and my son, to our tropical vacations. So you can kind of see, right? This book is a collection of personal essays, social critique, prose. It's complex, it's multi-layered. It's not easy to describe. I've been trying to practice for like months leading up to this event, like my elevator pitch. What would I say if I only had 5 stories to write up and tell someone what this book is? I'm like, I'm not sure yet. So I really look forward to you all reading it. It's not a happy Hawaii book. It's not a happy Hapa book, okay? I wrote it, as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, I wrote it as a call-in to Asian American, and mixed race folks, and really for all of us to consider how we participate in the colonization of Hawaii and the disposition of Native Hawaiian people, and also to look at how we're building our identities and make sure that they're not built on the oppression of others. And I also wrote it as an affirmation for mixed folks. Munyeka said she was inspired by me, but I'm also inspired by her. Love, back and forth love. I hear from a lot of mixed folks, mixed youth especially, that there's still so little room for us to tell our stories. We have this way of talking about race in the United States where it's tough to enter in that conversation if you're mixed. So I wanted to write this to show that we can tell our stories too, and I'm not telling anyone else how to feel, but that we can tell our stories and they're different. They're not the same as other people's stories, right? So I wrote it for that reason as well. And on that note, and then I want to get to your questions. And really quickly, I'm just doing a time check. We started late, so we're going a little late. We're probably going to go until about 8:45, okay? Just so if you need to leave, I understand. This is the last passage I'll read. I want to take a few questions, and then we are going to have closing ceremony also from Kalei, so make sure you stay for that. When I was a young woman growing up in Southern California, so this is another piece that I wrote when I was in Hawaii. People are really brown in Hawaii because they get tan, right? It's super sunny there. So I was reflecting on what does that mean for someone like me, right? When I was a young woman growing up in Southern California, I never asked questions about the celebrity and beach culture where tanning is trendy. Anyone from SoCal here? I was pretty brainwashed. I went to school with Hollywood people, producers and directors, progeny, Goldie Hawn's daughter, Mel Gibson's children, the half-siblings of the Kardashians. It's true. I would lie on the sand in the sun like everyone else and roast, front, back, flip again, dip in the ocean, back to the sand. The child of a darker-skinned Taiwanese immigrant, under the relentless SoCal sun, I settled into a consistent gold to toasted brown all year round. With the suntan and my mixed features, I was unquestionably ethnic. People could always see it, and there was no doubt in my mind that I was a half-Asian girl. Case in point, once someone's white mother, a casting director, combed our high school for potentials. She was casting a Kodak commercial and needed Asian talent. There were just 2 of us. Okay, I'm just gonna stop for a second. I only literally figured out this memory recently. I just went through it as a teenager and never understood the racial implications of it until probably in the last few years. Okay, so she was casting a Kodak commercial and needed Asian talent. There were just 2 of us in my high school. Me, the Asian mixed girl, and a classmate who I suddenly recall was Native Hawaiian. How bizarre that I only recall this about him now. Or maybe not bizarre at all. I guess we would have fallen more under the Asian-looking category. Anyway, we were passable, or passably perfect. We auditioned for the hell of it. They weren't interested in my Hawaiian classmate, but I got cast for, I didn't know what. They didn't tell me until the day of the shoot. I played a tourist in Chinatown, taking pictures of a Lunar New Year celebration. It was weird, artless, and awkward. And looking back, I know now why I seemed right for the part. The commercial was aired internationally, so we're seeing this a lot, right? At that time, we weren't seeing this as much, but now we're seeing a lot of interracial couples, interracial families, mixed-race bodies on commercials, so this was definitely a sign of things to come. Part them, part us. My ambiguous face held exactly the red appeal for the broadest customer base. I was the best candidate to make them the most money. They paid me well, but I bet they paid themselves much better. I never really thought back then about how the color of my skin as a mixed woman has special implications. Realization has come with moving to a cloudy state, where my skin has become lighter than I ever realized it could, and I've noticed my ethnicity comes into question in ways it never used to. What are you? A brown woman asked me once, because if you said you were white, I would have believed you. I felt so wounded when the woman said this to me, but also I started to question myself and my Asian authenticity. Ultimately, I came to understand that getting tan is more for white people than anyone else. Because when you're a light-skinned biracial person who browns under the sun, you're less likely to look tan than you are to look ethnic. The shift is bound to result in others treating you differently as an identifiable person of color, which in turn significantly impacts the way you see yourself, but then ultimately ends in an unholy mental mess when the tan goes away. I'm pretty sure white folks don't have that problem, generally speaking. But being in Hawaii unsettles me on this subject more than ever. I've been told repeatedly by people who've lived on the islands that getting brown or browner is a thing here too. The browner the better. The construct feels recognizable, even as it's totally different. People of color wanting to be darker on the islands, to look more islander, indigenous, ethnic, is clearly different from white Southern Californians browning to look Hollywood hot. For me, in this liminal body, though, there is no clarity. Only aggravating questions remain. As a biracial Asian girl who grew up in SoCal, where she was always brown, lives in Washington, where she's always light, yet looks so ethnic after a few days in Hawaii's sun that locals and even sometimes Native Hawaiians claim her. How in hell does all this work? It's a damn fucking rabbit hole. If I cover up and stay in the shade, am I doing it because white dermatologists put the fear of God in me? Or am I trying to pass? If I say screw it and let myself get brown, crispy, freckled, and more wrinkled, am I doing it to look Hollywood hot like I was taught growing up? Or am I doing it to look more ethnic like a local? For a multiracial woman, is being brown a costume or credential, a liability or a passport? How do I get out from under this vexing albatross of narratives about my mixed racialized body that dictate what's right or not right about how I look, and make it so that any choice I make can't be my own? Okay.